Chapter 2. Can You Kidnap an Adult? Part 2. Regulus hadn't thrown a proper temper tantrum since he was 7 years old, and his dad threw out his pet rock. He had gotten punished for that, but he was upset. Genuinely upset. Still is, actually. Regulus took fantastic care of that rock. It was the last time he was careful with anything. When Regulus woke up in a hospital bed in New York City with his brother at his side, he felt the urge to do the exact same thing. He just wanted to scream his frustrations at the top of his lungs just to get them out of his head. Apparently, at 22 years old, that was frowned upon. Sirius was waiting for Regulus to say something first, but he didn't want to break the silence yet. He had a pounding headache, he was disoriented, and he just wanted to close his eyes and go right back to sleep. What the fuck happened? Last thing he remembered, he was on a stage. He was dancing, he was doing his job. How did he end up in the hospital? He noticed the cast, of course he did. It was plastered onto his arm. He didn't seem to notice that this meant his arm was actually in cast until he moved it. Did he break his arm? Well, no, not his arm. The cast started about halfway down his forearm and ended at his hand. It meant a wrist injury. And well, that was just fucking fantastic. Fuck me, he mumbled, leaning his head back against the pillow and closing his eyes. I thought we agreed to end the ancestral traditions, Sirius said. In any other scenario, Regulus would have smiled at that. Right now, he just wanted some answers. Did you break my wrist? Sirius blinked at him. That's your first thought? It isn't a ridiculous one. I might as well break your other wrist now after an accusation like that. So, you admit you broke it? Sirius rolled his eyes. You fell on it. Fractured. Regulus snorted because that was impossible. Regulus simply didn't fall. It didn't happen. He practiced, and he made sure he couldn't fall. No matter what. He never stumbled, never felt weak to lift Pandora into the air. So yeah, it made more sense that Sirius just snapped his wrist. No, I didn't. It wasn't until Sirius went quiet that Regulus remembered. He had felt dizzy, but that was normal. It was one of those things that had happened before, and he was able to just take a couple drinks of water and half a granola bar before he was set right again. This time was different. This time, he fell. Regulus fell and broke his wrist. Yeah, now he definitely wanted to throw a tantrum. How was he supposed to dance with a broken wrist? He couldn't, he supposed, although that was taking another minute to set in entirely. He couldn't dance? Regulus didn't know who he was without ballet. It was all he had ever known. His entire childhood and adolescent life was dictated to making Regulus into the best principal dancer in the world. And he had achieved that. It's broken, he said, trying out the words. They felt wrong. They didn't make sense. Everything had been working out. Regulus was making his own money. He had mostly cut ties from his whole family, and he was really fucking successful. Are you okay? Sirius asked. And really? Just really? Clearly, he was not okay. He just found out he wouldn't be able to work for weeks. He was most definitely fired, and he had no idea what he was supposed to do. Sure, he had a little bit of money saved up, or rather, a lot of money saved up, but he did not like the idea of having to fall back on that already. He picked up the first thing he found and just fucking launched it across the room, a metallic box hitting the wall before falling onto the ground with a clang. That was a stupid question, Sirius said a moment later, eyes still lingering on the box Regulus threw. It had been full of Q-tips for some reasons, and now they were all over the floor. Yeah, it was. The air was still heavy, like it wasn't moving until everything that needed to be said was said. That was how he knew there was more, if the look on Sirius's face hadn't been enough. What is it? The doctor said you were malnourished. Regulus looked at him, head turned slightly to the side. Was that it? Was that really what was making Sirius look like he wanted to crawl outside of his own skin? Okay? Okay? How is that just okay? Don't play stupid Sirius. You used to dance too. I never starved myself. I'm not starving myself, Regulus said calmly. He knew better than that most of the time. If he didn't eat, it was because he was too busy, or too tired, or because he simply just forgot. And he's been busy the past couple of weeks. Food was low on his list of priorities. When was the last time you ate a real meal? What's that supposed to prove? Oh my god, you can't even answer the question? I don't have an eating disorder. Regulus, you aren't eating. Yes, I am. You fainted. Okay, I get it, serious. I fainted. Woohoo! Dancers faint all the time. It's not healthy. I don't care. Sirius looked dangerously close to exploding. He had always had a short temper, although usually not with Regulus. At least not when they were kids. It doesn't matter anymore anyway. Not like you need to worry about me working too hard. Sirius deflated a little bit, and Regulus did too. He was trying to come to terms with it, and he knew a small part of him felt relieved. He had needed a break, no matter how much he didn't want one. This was his body literally telling him that he needed a break. It would have killed him if he kept going at the same rate he was. He wasn't starving himself, not intentionally. Dance was more important than food during performance seasons. Everyone knew that. Sirius himself even knew it firsthand. Before he left the family, he wasn't bad at ballet. He was a natural at every single thing he did. The only reason that Regulus was any better was because he actually put in the work. When Sirius left for a couple of minutes, it gave Regulus time to think. He just needed to think. He thought through what he knew first. First, he passed out while performing. Second, his wrist is now broken and his lower arm is in a cast. Third, he couldn't dance for weeks. So yeah, that all absolutely sucked. But Regulus could breathe. He had space in his mind to remember to breathe. He didn't have anywhere to be, anyone to impress. There weren't any more performances waiting for him, or any more hours he needed to spend practicing. He physically could not do any of that. So, what was he meant to do? He hated the idea of doing nothing, but it was the most likely scenario. He didn't have another job to go to, or any other hobbies he could take up for the time being. He would probably end up going back to his flat in London. Maybe he would see Dorca a couple of times. Shit, Dorca! She was still his manager. He kind of need to tell her what had happened. He had no idea where his phone was, and he didn't actually care to find it at that moment. Dorca could wait. The news would be the same no matter what time he told her at. When Sirius came back, it was with all three of his friends. They were all dressed basically the same, in black suits except without the jackets or ties. They probably took them off. Regulus thought they looked like a string quartet. Did they buy identical suits for the ballet? They all silently stared for a moment, and Regulus pointedly did not say a word. He had technically intended to meet them all, but he was in no mood to do so anymore. One of Sirius's friends took him outside, probably to talk about Regulus, which inevitably left Regulus with the tall one and the blonde one. Fantastic. You're the man in the elevator, the blonde one said, pointing at him after a moment. Regulus tried to remember, but his brain wasn't really working all that well, especially to remember details from 24 hours ago, apparently. I offered to give you a massage. That was what made Regulus remember. He had thought it was so odd to offer a neck massage to a stranger just because they seemed tense. Everyone in the entire world was tense. It was just the current state of society. Ah, right, he said. The tall one just kept looking at him like he was a circus freak. Regulus did not like that one bit. What? He asked. He blinked. You're Sirius's brother. I'm Regulus, he corrected. Being a younger brother meant always getting called Sirius's brother. God forbid he was actually his own person separate from his brother. Yeah, no, I know. The tall one and the blonde one seemed to be lacking in any sort of social decorum, Regulus noted. They were opposite sides of the same coin, two different anxieties embodied. Was it Regulus making them anxious? Maybe his brother had made him out to be some sort of monster, and that was why they were acting so strangely. We think you should come on tour with us, the tall one said. Regulus did not move. There was no fucking way he was going on tour with his brother. It simply would not happen. We? Regulus asked. The blonde one nodded. Yeah, because of your injury and everything. It's a wrist. It wasn't like he was completely incapable of doing things by himself. He had gotten lucky, he supposed, that it was his left arm. He could mostly still function, still write and cook, and type with relative ease. Sirius isn't. I quite frankly do not care what Sirius has to think about any of this, actually, Regulus said. I'm not going to be your guy's groupie. Oh, I want groupies, the blonde one said, a bit of sadness in his tone. You'll get them, the tall one assured him, his tone a bit patronizing. Regulus wasn't so sure, but he didn't voice that out loud. There was always a part of his brain that just told him to be an asshole to everyone, to be brutally honest because it was easier than having to pretend. He used to have to pretend when he cared what his parents thought. But it had been a long time since Regulus had thought about if what he was doing was pleasing to them. Then, in a way that was almost comical, they both seemed to remember what they were doing here. Right, so he'll come? The blonde one said hopefully. No. So you're coming? The tall one said. No. Brilliant. Moony mate, did you hear? He's coming on tour with us. No, I'm not. Yes, Wormtail, I did hear. This is great news. You two are absolutely. His words were cut off by the sound of the door opening again, and all Regulus saw was Sirius. To his credit, he looked mildly terrified that Regulus might have literally murdered his friends. Still, it caused a great bit argument until Sirius stormed out of the room. Again. He was always so bloody dramatic. He had to let everyone know every single time he entered or exited the room, or the world would probably end. He was left with the last of Sirius's friends, and he realized he knew him. Maybe knew wasn't a good word. He had met him. Once. And only because he thought it was a smart idea to blast his music at 1 in the morning in a completely booked hotel. James Potter. Yeah, Regulus knew who he was, and he hated him. With every bone in his body, including the broken ones. He hated everything he stood for. He was arrogant, and annoying and completely selfish to just steal Sirius away like that. The moment Sirius met James, it had been over for Regulus. He had been left alone to deal with everything by himself: the expectations, the house, their parents, all of it. So, who cared if he had an easy smile or kind eyes? He was the reason that everything in Regulus's life had taken a turn for the worst, and he would never forgive him for that. He had been discharged at 5 in the morning, and they supplied him with 2 days' worth of pain meds, just in case. Regulus knew pain like the palm of his hand. He highly doubted he would be using them. He did end up taking them with him. He would have done anything to just get out of the hospital. The only clothes that Regulus had on him was what he had been wearing to perform, so he forced Sirius to go buy him something so he could leave. He was not going to be wearing the hospital gown out of there, and he did not want to put the tie pants back on. They left the blonde one, Peter, with Regulus to make sure he wasn't going to try and run away. It had crossed his mind, but Sirius would just come looking for him anyway, so what was the point? Peter was interesting. He offered to play a bunch of card games of which Regulus had no interest in. He also tried to convince him to join them on the tour, which didn't work. He was still very certain that Regulus would not be going with them. And then Peter fell asleep. Regulus thought that he made a horrible babysitter. Sirius was upset with him. That much was painfully obvious. When he dropped off the bag of clothes, he did it without a word, and when they got into a cab, he was still silent. Just really? The silent treatment? How mature. When they got to the hotel, Regulus just wanted to go to bed. He didn't want to hear any more talk about his inability to take care of himself or how he just needed to go on a tour with them for a couple of days. They did not care about his well being, not actually. They were strangers, except for Sirius, but he wasn't saying anything to him anyway. Regulus knew for a fact that James had a room on the top floor, the 11th, but not anybody else. When he had been in the elevator with Peter, he had chosen the 10th floor, so he didn't understand why all 5 of them were headed up to the 11th. They all stopped when Regulus did in front of his room, and he got his room key out of the pile of stuff he had gotten back from the ballet. He turned around, facing the 4 of them. "What do you want?" Stupid question. He knew it was a stupid question, and still the words just came tumbling out of his mouth before he could stop them. He blamed the anesthetic and the after effects of it. He never would have entertained the idea of them following him to his room otherwise. "We want you to go on tour with us," James said with a smile that was just... It was so... Regulus, for his sanity, does not plan on finishing that thought. He looked away from him, shaking his head. "Not happening." "Regulus, when I say this is your last chance, my answer is no," he said again. For not noticing sooner, he had no excuse other than the fact that after so many years he had forgotten how truly idiotic his brother was. On a good day, Regulus was strong. He could throw bodies around the air like it was practically nothing. But that was when he had full use of both of his arms. So when he slid the key in, he hadn't been expecting for the 4 of them to just barrel into the room and start packing up his stuff. And there wasn't anything he could do about it either. Remus was keeping him from stopping them. "You're like a fucking tree, you know that?" Regulus said, glaring up at him and still trying to get around. He was basically forced into the corner, while his brother and his friends grabbed all of his things, threw them messily into his suitcase, and started to wheel it outside. Regulus thought they could have at least folded his clothes. He was literally being kidnapped. Stop making fun of Moody, Sirius said, appearing next to him. Oh, so you're talking to me now? Didn't realize I wasn't, he said with a shrug. He was lying. Regulus could just tell. He was smug about it, like it had been his plan all along to get Regulus to realize that he actually wanted his brother to talk to him. His plan worked too, which was so stupid that it made Regulus actually mad at himself. The moment they had brought the idea up in the hospital, he knew he was trapped. There was no way it wasn't going to happen. Sirius really would never live without him. And there was that annoying, nagging voice in Regulus's head that was saying he couldn't ruin his brother's first big tour just because he was stubborn. That did not mean he had to be happy about it. The bus was quaint. He was trying to find a nice way to describe it, but the idea of living in a bus for a week did not appeal to him much at all. There were only 4 bunks, all of which were claimed immediately upon entering. This was also their first time on their tour bus, Regulus realized. So he took a step back and let them enjoy it, trying to only be judgmental in his head. There was a part of him that couldn't believe all that his brother had achieved. Regulus didn't have a lot of downtime to just listen to music, so he didn't really know any of their songs. Not since they started actually getting serious about making it. So seeing them, living in nightlife, and traveling on tour buses, and living in expensive hotels, yeah, it was a bit jarring. But there was that other part of him that wasn't surprised at all. When Sirius wanted something, he got it. Simple as that. Sometimes he has to put in a little bit of work. Other times things just fell into his lap. But Sirius always got what he wanted. And he had only ever really wanted to do music, to write songs, and to sell out stadiums. When they were kids, Sirius told regular stories of what his life was going to be like when he got out, all of the things he was going to achieve. It was gratifying to watch him actually doing it, even if he was pissed off at him at the moment. When you first walk in, there were a couple of lounging chairs on one side and a counter with some cupboards and a sink on the other side. Regulus flipped the handle to see if it worked, and was surprised when the water actually came out. From there was a much more narrow hall with the bunks, 2 on either side with curtains as the only form of privacy. Each bunk had a window, a set of sheets, and one singular pillow. Regulus was very glad that he was not accepted to sleep in one of those. He needed at least 2 pillows to sleep comfortably. The bus also had a bathroom, if it could really even be called that. It was almost too small for Regulus to even stand in, and he imagined Remus, the beanstalk, would have a lot more trouble than he did. In the back of the bus was a room that was separated by a door. There was an L-shaped couch along 2 of the walls, and there was a mini fridge, and then not much more. So yeah, Regulus thought that quaint was an adequate word for it.